Thank you for joining us today. As you may already know, especially if you've joined us for one of the previous webinars in this series, a significant concept of the humaculture philosophy is feed the soil, not the plant. The most successfully sustained organizations are those focused, whether intentionally or not, on cultivating and enriching workplace where people thrive. Those focused on people by paying the highest wages or attempting to compete by having the richest or latest fad benefits often encounter extremely difficult stretches when they suddenly realize they must refocus their attention on the bottom line. In fact, it is easy for organizations to be reactive and become distracted by all sorts of things that seem to be the most important at any given time. Today's presentation helps identify ways to stay focused in spite of, or perhaps because of, things that might otherwise be distractions or impediments on the path of success. We'll consider hidden opportunities in the Consolidated Appropriations Act, also known as the CEAA, which are focused on strategic responses to minimize employer and employee healthcare costs, as well as reduce compliance complexity. We believe the best response to the CEAA is through an approach that combines strategy and compliance. This approach will help improve the perceived and actual value of your organization's health coverage, contributing to the fertile soil you seek to cultivate. Let me introduce our speakers. I'm Steve Cyboran. I'm an actuary and have over 3 decades of experience in people support, traditionally referred to as HR, benefits, and total rewards. I've conducted research and take a behavioral approach to all reward programs. Wes Rogers is our Humaculturist. He combines his more than 35 years of business and leadership experience, as well as the research and case studies from my past, to conceptualize the organization through the horticulture metaphor and apply its principles through the 7 dimensions of humaculture. Jack is our strategy and compliance consultant. He's a lawyer with decades of experience. He is a pioneer of several benefit innovations and has frequently testified at the Department of Labor on various HR and benefit issues. Let me introduce our first poll. So please let us know to what extent the workplace impacts employee, sorry, that's a wrong poll. All right, is your plan a calendar year or a plan year? Is your plan year a calendar year? All right. Wow, we got 50% exactly calendar year and 50% are plan year. Let me share those results. All right, let's go to our next poll. Have you received any fee disclosures from any brokers or consultants that you utilize? All right. No one has yet received any fee disclosures. Let me share our third poll. Oops. Actually, there's the results. Actually, the third poll seems to be missing, so we will move on. I will let Wes tell us a little more about humaculture and how it is important to today's topic.
Well, thank you, Steve. In each of our webinars, we introduce the idea of humaculture. So some of you may have already heard a portion of this before. However, in each webinar, we also emphasize a different aspect of the humaculture philosophy and approach. Humaculture is a dynamic paradigm through which to understand, form, and optimize organizations, and provides a holistic framework in which we can make all decisions. Humaculture borrows many of its insights from the field of horticulture. Horticulture actually provides a very keen metaphor to understand the organization, its purpose to attract, to engage, grow, retain, and sustain and transition the people who interact with it, whether they're employees, customers, or others. A good horticulturist understands that the success and sustainability of any garden or landscape depends on recognizing and balancing the climate and terrain, the soil structure itself, the available space and fertility of the soil, the arrangement and variety of the plantings, the specific plants and their characteristics.
To the webinar, you have entered as an attendee in listen-only mode.
The conditions to optimize the availability and absorption of nutrients, and the desired harvest or value to be derived from the garden or landscape. Each of these dimensions, though, dynamically influences all the others. Similarly, humaculture is the art and philosophy of creating profitable, healthy organizations conceptualized as soil in which people thrive. Humaculture forms the basis then for a systematic approach, again, to making all decisions of a business or organization in the context of those 7 dimensions of humaculture. Our webinar today is focused on strategic responses to an aspect of primarily a couple of the 7 dimensions, the environment and real assets. While laws and regulations, which are an aspect of the environment dimension, certainly demand our attention. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit lost here. And a response. As organizational leaders, we can also go beyond mere compliance and leverage the new disclosure requirements to assure we're not spending more than necessary. That is, we're preserving real assets, and that we get maximum value for the expenditures we make. Even though these 2 dimensions are our primary focus, you've probably figured out by now, if you've joined us for previous webinars, that everything we do in one dimension, again, impacts all the others. So the humaculture philosophy then will guide our work even when we're engaged selectively or narrowly on even a couple of dimensions as we are here today. Steve? Next slide, please. So merely complying with the CAA and the transparency rules is expected to only increase costs for both employer and employee. In our previous webinars, we discussed how a strategic response to compliance requirements can create a competitive advantage and result in savings for the employee and employer, and potentially increase consumerism and even employee health. Today, we focus on pest management, assuring plant advisors are disclosing any potential conflicts of interest and that the fees paid to advisors represent high value. It seems Congress believes there may be a need to provide responsible plan fiduciaries with additional tools to support fiduciaries as they fulfill their responsibilities. But mere compliance may miss some opportunities to assure dollars are spent on advisors are invested wisely. Plan fiduciaries should use this opportunity to recognize covered service providers who have already proactively disclosed all compensation, direct and indirect, and are already demonstrating value. But the new law also gives fiduciaries an excellent opportunity to consider their organization's strategic priorities and whether the services and philosophies of the covered service providers they work with are truly aligned with their strategic priorities. Even if it appears services and philosophies are aligned, is the form of compensation itself behaviorally aligned to encourage the best actions? So why the title Pest Management? Well, gardeners are familiar with the idea of pest insects versus beneficial insects. Many insects eat the crops, damage the fruit, or otherwise reduce or degrade the harvest. Many, however, help the garden to grow or even protect it. Some insects are responsible for pollination, which is critical for almost all food production. Some insects, such as ladybugs, actually keep the garden free of other damaging pests. Today's webinar is designed to provide some insights into how to strategically evaluate broker and consultant compensation, and this will allow a responsible plan fiduciary to identify the pests and distinguish them from the beneficial insects, quote unquote, in the garden. One robs the plants of resources, the other contributes to their success. So let's move beyond compliance. We want employers to broaden their thinking and create thriving organizations sustained by growing, thriving people. Steve, can you tell us a little bit about how the law and regulations alone or compliance with them actually alone are likely to increase costs?
Sure. We have addressed this in all our previous webinars, but it is important to understand that the CAA is likely to increase costs. Chances are you or your service providers are currently working on achieving compliance with the CAA. Many of its provisions apply to plan years beginning on or after January 1st, 2022. So they're already in effect. However, we believe that basic compliance with the CAA, No Surprises Act, and other transparency rules will add to the cost of coverage through increased employer-paid medical expenses by paying out-of-network services on an in-network basis, medical costs inflation by prompting both in-network and out-of-network providers to increase charges and provide more services, increased employee-paid expenses through cost shifting, and increased administrative and other compliance-related expenses. So yes, just like health reform 10 years ago, new compliance requirements such as the CAA Act are likely to add to the healthcare cost inflation. As this graph indicates, we have seen constant unrelenting inflation despite laws designed to bend the cost curve, which it did, just not in the direction, the desired direction. If we extended this graph, the slope of that line will probably become even steeper because the costs mentioned above will add yet another layer of expense. Notice the acceleration of inflation around 2014, just when most of the provisions of the Affordable Care Act were becoming effective. That result occurred in part because many, perhaps most employers decided on a compliance-only response. So again, we believe a strategic approach is critical. Jack, can you give us some specifics about the disclosure requirements?
Sure, Steve. Here's a quick summary of the new fee disclosure requirements. Essentially, the new requirement is for those covered service providers who provide a plan brokerage or consulting services and who receive direct and indirect compensation, referred to broadly as fees, that exceed $1,000 or more. For an ERISA, a plan, group health plan subject to ERISA can be any size, any form, including accepted benefits, can be insured or self-insured, where the disclosure of fees has to be provided reasonably in advance of contracting. Importantly, while the covered service provider is the entity that's supposed to provide the disclosure, ERISA compliance begins and ends with the fiduciary. So it is the responsible plan fiduciary who's at risk here, and the plan fiduciary needs to pursue these disclosures. Let's dig into this to give you a better feel for the dynamic here. First, start with the covered service provider definition. It's what you do, brokerage and consulting, defined very broadly, not the title or status, and it's not limited to those who are licensed or marketed as brokers or consultants. Remember that it includes both direct and indirect compensation, whether the fees are bundled, separated, itemized, and it applies to all those paid $1,000 or more, including affiliates, subcontractors, pretty much anybody who provides brokerage or consulting services. And because it's compliance, a provider of, say, consulting services, who maybe subcontracts their communications and marketing, will kind of have to make a call on who and how to disclose and what portion of any subcontractor fees they'll need to disclose, if any, regarding any specific client. Next slide. As mentioned earlier, the disclosure requirement, the fee disclosure requirement, applies to all group health plans, excepting only qualified small employer health reimbursement arrangements and HSAs and voluntary health plans that are not ERISA plans. Next slide. The required disclosures are pretty extensive. What services are to be provided, the fiduciary status of the covered service provider, a description of the compensation, direct, indirect, contingent, or any other form of compensation. All should be disclosed including any prepaid or termination fees, sufficiently in advance of contracting to allow the plan fiduciary time to determine the reasonableness of the fees and to identify any conflicts of interest. Next slide. So bottom line, the intent of the requirements are to provide the responsible plan fiduciaries with sufficient information to assess the reasonableness of the compensation and any potential conflicts of interest before entering into or renewing a contract. Those who refuse to disclose, who request unreasonable compensation, or who may have one or more conflicts may be pests that you will want to avoid. Importantly, the responsible plan fiduciary remains liable. So the more appropriate response is to actively request disclosures, not passively await them. Importantly, to demand them from all vendors providing any kind of services for the plan, not just those that the responsible plan fiduciary believes are subject to the disclosure rules because they provide brokerage or consulting services or are charging fees of $1,000 or more. Bottom line, keep in mind that all service providers are subject to ERISA 408B2 disclosure rules. It's the same disclosure rules are here when it comes to a 401k plan. So why stop short? Why limit your disclosure demands only to those you know have provided brokerage or consulting services? Next slide. As we said in each month's presentation, reference-based pricing, health savings accounts, DOPE, mental health, and now fees, you may want to leverage the new requirements to go beyond compliance to pursue a strategic response. Again, if you take nothing else away from these sessions, remember to apply Yogi Berra's famous words, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. That is, if you only take the path to compliance, you may be allowing pests to unnecessarily deplete plan assets, or maybe they're adding impediments, rocks, and weeds to your soil because the pest advisors are not aligned with your strategic priorities. And importantly, compliance is a never-ending challenge. So remember to also take the strategic path, create more fertile soil where you can avoid at least some aspects of compliance and cultivate a better organization with less expensive, tax advantage, and more beneficial health coverage. Next slide. So what are those fiduciary duties? Well, great gardeners maintain constant vigil, and they're very familiar with the plants that they put into their gardens. They're able to recognize the telltale signs of pest damage quickly. Plant fiduciaries have a similar role. Responsible plant fiduciaries, like great horticulturists, need not limit themselves to the stated requirements. They can leverage performance of their fiduciary duties into a strategic competitive advantage. Yeah, the basic ERISA fiduciary duties are stated on this slide. Check the box if you like, but opportunities exist to improve outcomes by embracing the challenge. Next slide. And sure, you could stop with, disclosure of fees and only limit it to the folks who provide brokerage and consulting services. But keep in mind, and we don't really think about this much when it comes to health and welfare plans, the selection of covered service providers, whether it's a 401k plan or a health plan or dental or vision or life or whatever, the selection of the covered service providers is an ERISA fiduciary duty for all services, for all plans subject to ERISA. If you just accept the fee disclosures from brokers and consultants and only for your group health plans, well, that's only the first step. For example, when a broker proposes placement of insurance and wants you to sign the BOR, broker of record agreement, is it too much to ask the broker to document why this coverage at this price will create a competitive advantage? A strategic response goes beyond having the broker or consultant justify their fee and goes way beyond and asks them to confirm why this benefit, this design, is going to create a competitive advantage, and not just for this year, but the future as well, in terms of value add and employee engagement. The better question might be, well, does this benefit fit? Does it avoid creating maybe a sense of entitlement? Think about the strategy that you're pursuing. Perhaps you have once upon a time bought into the consultant and HR speak. We need to offer a lucrative, competitive benefits package in order to attract, retain, and engage top talent. Top talent. Really? Given all the non-discrimination and eligibility rules that apply to tax-favored benefits, how can such a broad-based benefit plan differentiate top talent from, say, not so top talent? And if your benefits are successful at attracting and retaining employees, are you attracting maybe anti-selection? Are you retaining those who, let's say, might prefer to leave but stay for the benefits? So how does this plan fit into your total rewards, your value proposition? Is it consistent with your business objectives? Perhaps that's something you can ask the broker and consultant. Regardless, it's something you need to confirm for yourself. Pests may focus on the cost effectiveness of the benefit. Strategic advisors, like beneficial insects in the garden, identify and support your strategic business goals and help you achieve them. Next slide. So reducing your fiduciary risk is certainly important. And remember, compliance focuses on the reasonableness of the fees paid relative to the services provided. So as a final step, you need to make sure that there are no prohibited transactions. Keep an eye out for those conflicts of interest. Steve, can you tell us how an advisor might support a plan strategically?
Sure, Jack. So how does a strategically minded advisor support you? What does a strategic approach look like? First, a good strategic advisor will help you envision where you want to go. Then they will analyze where you are relative to that vision and help you optimize your investments within your given budget to help you ensure the total rewards offerings are distinctive and magnetic. Even apparently well-designed initiatives often have little or no lasting results because they are not rooted in a clear understanding of the organizational vision, purpose, and mission. A strategic vision-driven approach creates value far greater than a typical solution-driven or problem-solving approach. Without a doubt, a strategic approach will result in a solution. However, first start by establishing a vision for the desired outcome, and then work to understand how the organization and its operations need to be structured to achieve the vision and mission. Once you know where you're headed, you really need to be sure everything you do is supporting that direction, and everything should motivate the supporting behaviors. A strategic advisor is also keenly aware that people and organizations cannot really be forced to show up to work or to any level of performance or outcome. As such, a good advisor will help guide an organization's leadership and those planted in the organization to think differently about how the organization can achieve and sustain success, creating an ideal organizational soil in which people are inspired to performance and results. Often, the focus on problem solving perpetually keeps an organization mired in problems, which then shapes the culture. A strategic approach guides organizational leadership to think very differently about all areas of the organization, including benefits. The shift in thinking should be from reactive to proactive, from a perspective of management to one of leadership, from a mindset of solving problems to one of creating an organization that produces desired outcome and reduces errors and defects in the first place. Jack, would you summarize what we've said so far?
Well, Steve, I'd say that good enough is never good enough. If you settle for being compliant, if you accept being just competitive, average, mediocre, if you fail to differentiate your employment value proposition, well, think about it. No one ever achieved excellence by striving to be average. If you just accept compliance, good enough, then the yield from your investments in your humaculture will likely be reduced. Worse, failure to take a strategic approach to optimize every opportunity, it could have some spillover effects elsewhere in the organization. From an economist perspective, you might think of these spillovers as something they call negative externalities, like pollution. The spillover may erode your organization's soil, reducing the return you could have achieved from all the investments you've actually made to enhance the soil in terms of environment, organization, real assets, intangible assets, people, rewards, and creative value. Steve, how do behavioral bias and design affect pest management?
Sure, thank you, Jack. In each of our webinars in this series, we share some insights into how to use behaviorally designed rewards and communications to help lead employees to better decisions. Effective behaviorally designed advisor arrangements will lead to the best use of the organization's real assets within the constraints of the environment and avoid those pests that rob the organization of needed assets elsewhere. Let's consider some aspects of effective behaviorally designed arrangements in our Humaculture example. Here are a few examples of heuristics from our library that can apply to your advisor arrangement. First, ensure the arrangement doesn't create biased advice. For example, avoid compensation based on a percentage of the premium or vendor fees. Will an advisor under this type of an arrangement make recommendations to reduce their fees? Compliance accepts a satisfactory outcome. A strategic response looks to optimize results. Good enough is not good enough. Third, sometimes the best results require you to write off an investment you have made in the past. Don't get overly invested in an existing relationship that isn't providing value. Fourth, the most successful brokers and consultants are great salespersons. You are looking for total reward experts with deep group health plan expertise. Be sure to cultivate a more nurturing advisor relationship to achieve an effective workplace. Wes, can you wrap up?
Sure.
Wes?
Sure, absolutely. Couldn't find the mute button there. Well, our goal with this strategic compliance series has been to encourage you to go beyond basic compliance. We've suggested some strategies that respond to the CAA and transparency and coverage rules that can help you actually do just that. In this, the final webinar of this series, we focused on ways to assure you as a responsible plan fiduciary can take full advantage of the direct and indirect disclosure rules of the CAA. We've developed a compliance toolkit to help you do that, but we think, again, mere compliance is simply not enough. Our Humaculturists can help you comply, or we can help you comply and offer approaches that may enhance your participants' experience with health coverage or other aspects of the employment experience. A dual approach will ensure you minimize the compliance challenges as well as create competitive advantages. I think now, Steve, to finish our wrap up, will tell us a little bit about some other available resources and something about our upcoming new webinar series.
Thanks, Wes. As we have said, the requirements of basic compliance is not the focus of this webinar series, but we have developed some great resources to support your basic compliance needs. Our sessions in this series provide other illustrative examples of strategies you can employ to leverage the hidden opportunities to be found in the No Surprises Act and the transparency and coverage rules. We want to help you better manage your benefit programs and differentiate your employee value proposition to support the talent that will best advance your company's business objectives. Next month, we begin an exciting new series focused on ways to outperform traditional performance management approaches. What works, what doesn't, and why it matters. We hope you will join us. All right, now we'll take a question. It looks like we're about out of time, so we'll only take one question. Let me see what we've got here. All right, here's one. We did not request fee disclosures for January 2022. Are we non-compliant? Jeff, do you want to take that?
Sure. Check with legal counsel, but probably not. if you're a calendar year, plan year. The EBSA, the Department of Labor, issued some guidance on December 30th. And in Q&A 6, it asks, and I quote, the new requirements apply beginning on December 27, 2021. Does this applicability date include service contracts or arrangements that have already been executed? And the same guidance provided an answer. Essentially, it says that, the CAA also provides a transition rule which clarifies that no contract executed prior to December 27th, 2021 by a group health plan subject to the requirements of 408B2 shall be subject to the requirements. So bottom line is that only if you sign your January the 1st renewal after December 27th, 2021, only in that rare situation would you have a potential issue. Now, half of the folks who answered the question early, the poll question early, mentioned that they had a fiscal year plan year. It wasn't a calendar year plan year. And for those folks, these rules will apply when you get to your renewal in 2022 for the 2022-2023 cycle. Steve?
Thank you. All right, now we will wrap up. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you find this helpful. We would love to hear from you, to learn more from you about your specific challenges or circumstances. Please remember to register for our next series. Watch out for that series when we'll hopefully be sending that out and posting it soon. And complete the survey so you will receive you'll receive following the session. We would value your feedback both on how we could have improved this content, what you liked about it, and what we might consider for the future. Thanks and have a great day.